Hi friends, my name's Michelle, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a mixed race woman with long straight black hair wearing a green v-neck top. I'm coming to you today with something a little bit more serious in tone than the usual content on Euphoria, but which has been rattling around in my brain for a few days and really needs an outlet. I want to talk a bit about safety measures at convention games, what is missing from our current culture, and what I believe needs to change. So why am I talking about this? At the time of writing and recording this video, all three Euphoria staff just got back from UK Games Expo, where I played in a convention game for the first time ever. I'd previously been too shy to join games at conventions, but Ida and Darcy invited me to come with them, and having two good friends alongside me seemed like it would be a good time. And we did indeed have a really good time, a great time, in fact. We loved our game of Trophy Dark so much that we immediately started scheming to find a GM amongst our friends who could run it for us again. But the more I've reflected on the game, the more I've realised how lucky we were that the game went so well. Trophy Dark is a horror game. It has a lot of extremely dark themes. Our game included character death, body horror, psychological horror, loss of player agency, betrayal within the party, and a player versus player fight. And we played with absolutely zero safety tools. Now, the GM did tell us that Trophy Dark was a play-to-lose game, and the three of us were keen on the idea of dying in a horrible evil forest. We also knew each other really well, and are familiar with each other's comfort zones when it comes to content in games, so we were able to engage in betrayal and PvP without worrying about going too far. But the thing is, there was a fourth player at the table. None of us knew her, and while it seemed to me that she was having fun too, I can't know that, can I? She was quite a shy and quiet person. I have no way of knowing whether what happened made her uncomfortable, and she just didn't feel empowered to say anything. I hope not. It seemed not, but I don't know. And on reflection, I just don't think that's good enough. This was a convention game, programmed by the convention, available to book onto through the convention website. The game took place on convention grounds. The room had convention staff present. Safety tools should have been implemented, and the convention should have made sure of that. I'm not having a go at our GM here. He was great, and it's not his fault that these things weren't put in place. It's the convention's responsibility, in my opinion. So I want to talk about the simple steps UK Games Expo and other conventions like it can and should take to ensure the attendees who have paid to be there can have a good time and aren't at risk of being stuck at a table playing in a game that's upsetting them. So who am I to talk about this anyway? Firstly, and I think most importantly, I love playing TTRPGs. I played 73 sessions across 25 different systems last year, and I'm already at 55 sessions and 21 systems this year. Yes, I have a spreadsheet. I also perform and produce actual play content, so that means I bring together a lot of people who don't know each other to play systems they might be unfamiliar with under a strict time limit, all the time. Safety tools are a really essential part of making actual play content that is both high quality and also a good experience for both the players and the audience. I'm also a professional GM, so I regularly run in-person, time-limited games for people who have paid to be at events. So I know what is possible and reasonable to expect a GM to do in similar situations such as a convention game. Finally, I do have event management experience. I've worked on various types of events, both in person and online, and most recently, I was part of the team behind EuphoriaCon, a first-year fully online convention which comprised workshops, talks, panels, and online games. I am not the final authority on how convention games should run, but my ideas are based on experience. I think it makes sense to talk about what I think other cons can do about safety by using the online convention I recently helped organise as an example. After all, I tried my best to ensure that the con I worked on had safety standards I could be proud of, so they should be a good demonstration of what I personally think con games should include. I do want to preface this by acknowledging that enormous conventions like UK Games Expo are very different to something like EuphoriaCon. EuphoriaCon was an extremely small-scale experiment, with only 16 games running across one day. It was online, free of charge, held within our Discord server, and while some new folks did join us for the Games Day, the majority of participants were people who we were at least somewhat familiar with. UK Games Expo, on the other hand, is the second largest gaming convention in Europe. According to their website, they had over 500 games tables running across the weekend. It is in person, it is a ticketed event, and their staff know essentially none of the people who attend. Now, most of these are reasons that I believe they should take table safety even more seriously than we do, but they're also reasons that a lot of what EUphoriaCon did would not be possible or practical for an event like UKGE. So I'm using EUphoriaCon not as some shining perfect example here, but more as a framework to discuss various table safety methodologies. And later I'll go on to say how I think those could be adapted and applied to a large in-person convention setting. GM onboarding. All EUphoriaCon GMs were provided with a roughly 10-page onboarding document, which described what was expected of them, what they could expect from us, logistical information about where they needed to be and when, and a clear description of all safety tools that they must use in their games. In an ideal world, I would have liked to have actually had an onboarding meeting as well online, because we didn't really have any way of knowing whether GMs actually read the document in full, but used in conjunction with the other measures I'm about to go through, the document did seem to work fairly well. Content warnings. When a GM pitched a game they'd like to run at our con, part of that pitch had to be a list of content warnings. These are potentially upsetting things that a GM knows for sure or thinks are very likely to come up during the course of playing the game. Those content warnings were included on the player sign-up listings, so players could make an informed decision about whether to sign up to a certain game, and could choose to apply to something else if there was a topic they weren't comfortable with. Of course, you can't predict everything that will come up during the course of an improvised game, but that's why we have other safety tools in place in addition to the content warnings. If more people signed up for a game than there were seats available, a group was chosen at random. This meant that, similar to most in-person convention games, players and GMs had no control over who they played with. However, they did at least get to find out who they were playing with ahead of the game day. All player groups were added to their own private Discord channel with the GM a few days before the con, so they could see who each other were and talk to each other. And if there was someone you felt really uncomfortable playing with for any reason, then you had time to make your excuses and bow out of the game. X card. The X card is a common safety tool which enables anyone at the table, including the GM, to immediately pause the game by making an X shape with their arms, tapping or holding up a physical X card, or saying aloud, X card. This is generally done if someone at the table is inadvertently doing something in game which is crossing a line or otherwise disturbing or upsetting another player, so that everyone can stop, get out of character, and agree to change what is happening before continuing. All GMs were told that the X card must be in use at their tables. The players were informed in writing ahead of the game day that X cards would be in use to make sure they were aware if the GM forgot to mention it. Lines and veils. Another very common safety tool. Lines and veils are a list of things that the players and GM are uncomfortable with. Lines are things that absolutely should not come up during the game under any circumstances. Veils are things which can exist but shouldn't be focused on. At Euphoria, we have an anonymized lines and veils spreadsheet, which was provided to all game groups ahead of the game day. This includes a list of standard lines that applied to all tables, things like racism, sexual assault, or transphobia. To be clear, these aren't topics that we think should never be explored in any TTRPG, but they are things that we felt were too heavy, nuanced, or upsetting to be explored in a sensible way at a short one-shot convention game with strangers. All players, including the GM, could then tick anything which applied from an additional list of common lines and veils, and there was space to add their own if there was anything missing. At EUphoriaCon, all players were told that they had to complete that spreadsheet by 8 p.m. the night before the game day, or they would be removed from the table. This way, we could ensure that the GM and all the players had a comprehensive list of topics to avoid in order to make the game fun for everyone present. We had an open door policy. This simply means that any player was allowed to leave the table at any time if they needed to. They didn't have to provide an explanation. We trusted them to make their own judgments according to their own needs. This was communicated to all players ahead of the game day to make sure they were aware in case the GM forgot to mention it. A named safety representative. A moderator was at their computer throughout the games day at EUphoriaCon and had access to all of the private voice channels where games were taking place. GMs and players were told this person's name and Discord handle, and told they were welcome to direct message this person and ping them if they had any issues, concerns, or problems with their game. This included if they needed an impartial person to join the voice channel and assist, support, advocate, or mediate a dispute between players. A feedback form. All GMs and players were sent a standard feedback form after the event with 3 text boxes where they could let us know about what went well, what they would like to see done differently in the future, and whether they had any issues we should be aware of. Not everyone filled this feedback form in, of course, but it was useful for us, and it gave everyone an easy way to let us know if they had something to share. So, to summarise, EUphoriaCon's safety methods included GM onboarding, content warnings, seeing who the players were ahead of time, X-card, lines and veils, open door policy, a named safety representative with a clear and easy way to contact them, and an invitation to give feedback. Of this list, I think there's only one which does not really translate well to an in-person convention, and that's seeing a list of players ahead of time. Obviously, in a Discord channel, you can see other people's handles, you can click on their profile and search in the server to see what messages they've sent. So you can get a kind of sense of the kind of person they are, and you can also just chat to them ahead of the games day itself. In real life, sharing people's full names could comprise a privacy or data protection issue, and sharing people's first names doesn't really give you any information at all. However, I think all of these other safety methods can easily be applied to a large convention. So let's talk about how. I'm going to use my experience playing a convention game at UKGE, and the experiences of some friends who I've spoken to about both playing and running games at various conventions as a point of comparison and illustration. So first, GM onboarding. To be transparent, I have never personally run a game at a convention before. I've only professionally run games at private events, so I can't speak from personal experience to what is common practice. But I've been told by friends who have GM'd games at various conventions in the UK and Europe that generally speaking, they got no training, onboarding, or guidance of any sort. They said it was entirely up to them to just show up and run their games however they saw fit, with little to no oversight from the conventions. I've been told by some people who have run games at UKGE that they at least do a little bit more than that. I'm told that UKGE provides their GMs with some combination of video, text, and Zoom meeting training, which focuses largely on the logistical side of things. Some people I spoke to told me that safety tools were never mentioned at all. Others said that they were informed by UKGE that they were expected to use safety tools, but they were not given a clear list of which ones to use, or a sense of whether it will be enforced in any way. I can say from personal experience that there was no enforcement whatsoever of safety tool use when I played in a game. It seems to me from this, admittedly, anecdotal data, that the culture of gaming conventions, at least in Europe, includes very little regard for the risk of disrespect for boundaries or psychological harm to players at the hands of the GMs they book to run games. In my opinion, conventions should be providing their GMs with a set list of safety tools that must be used and communicating how that will be enforced. Conventions should have a clear policy of what will happen if a GM does not use the safety tools required. Namely, any future games of theirs that weekend should be cancelled, and they should be barred from running a game at that convention again. Content warnings. Some of the games at UK Games Expo do include content warnings. There are set games that people can book onto, similar to what I described with EUphoriaCon, and as far as I know, all of those game listings on the website do include content warnings. This is a really good thing. Where things get trickier is with my experience of indie games on demand. The idea with this games room at UKGE is that you book onto a time slot, and when you walk into the room, you sit at a random table with a random GM who will have a game for you to play, or a small selection of games for you to choose from. In the case of our GM, he had 3 games for us to choose from, all of which, as I recall, had dark themes, and he did give us a quick top-line summary of what each game entailed. This was a decent compromise, and it's fair to assume that people who have booked on to a random game with a random GM are comfortable with some degree of uncertainty. I think it could be improved, however, by the GMs in the Game on Demand room having printed cards with the content warnings for each game they might run. These content warnings would be provided at the time the GM signed up to run a game for Games on Demand, and be printed out by convention staff and placed on their tables in the room on the day. That way, players can read and make an informed decision about which table they want to sit at, and which game to choose if there are options. Is this a bit more work than the GM just giving a verbal overview at the top of the game? Yes. But I think a convention that saw 51,000 ticket sales last weekend can afford the extra printer ink and few minutes of work. X-card. In my opinion, when you sign up for a convention game, you should have an explanation of what an X-card is and assurance it will be used provided in writing alongside your booking confirmation email. When you arrive at your game table, there should be a physical X card in the middle of the table provided by the convention to all GMs. The GM should also be instructed to remind all players about the X card at the beginning of their game, of course, but the physical reminder acts as a backup in case they forget. Humans are human, sometimes they forget things. Our trophy dart game had no X card in use. I didn't notice it at the time because we didn't need one, and if I had, I would have just made an X with my arms, but not everyone knows about that way of using the X card. And it is so much better to have something and not need it than need something and not have it. It is entirely ridiculous that X cards were not provided to all tables. They don't have to be fancy. It can be a piece of scrap paper with an X drawn on it. I think the lack of an X card at any convention game at this point is frankly unacceptable. Lines and veils. Now, I don't think having every player fill out a lines and veils spreadsheet ahead of their time slot is practical for large-scale in-person conventions. It's just not enforceable with the number of people we're dealing with. However, I do think every convention should have a list of agreed-upon blanket lines and veils. Sexual assault is an obvious one to me. Bigotry such as homophobia, racism, transphobia also seems quite obvious. These kinds of topics just aren't suitable for a time-limited game with people you don't know. These blanket lines should then be communicated to all GMs and players at the time of signing up to be involved with a convention game. And there should be a policy that anyone who crosses these lines will be immediately removed, have their ticket revoked. GMs who cross these lines should have their games halted, be removed from the convention, and be barred from ever running a convention game again. Zero tolerance. And if you think this is extreme, then I am very happy for you that you have never been on the receiving end of this kind of behavior. In terms of player and GM lines and veils, I don't think it would be too tricky to have a simple sheet of A4 paper with lines and veils and a list of the convention blanket lines printed at the top of it. The GM can hand out paper or cards to every player to write any additional lines and veils they have on, or just scribble on it if they have nothing else to add. And when they've been passed back, the GM can add those onto the sheet anonymously. I have been told that some GMs do this when they run convention games. Not with convention support, they've just taken it upon themselves to bring a sheet of paper and some note cards. It only takes a few minutes. This is a little less sleek than our snazzy spreadsheet, but it feels like a compromise that is cheap and easy to implement. And it's certainly better than the lines and veils system we had when we played at UKGE, which was entirely non-existent. Open door policy. I am told that UK Games Expo staff claim they have an open door policy. I did not see anything in writing to that effect. Like the content warnings, it feels like something that should be on every game listing, including a brief explanation of what it means, and sent along in writing with your booking confirmation email. I also think it could be printed at the bottom of those content warning cards that I pitched earlier, so again, there's a visual reminder on the table to prompt the GMs, so they can tell the group at the start of play, and there's a backup if the GM forgets to mention it. Pretty easy, right? A named safety representative. When I played a game at UK Games Expo, there was a staff member, or possibly he was a volunteer, who greeted us upon entry to the room. Ida, Darcy, and I actually knew him, so it was really nice to see him, and he obviously didn't introduce himself to us, so it's possible there was some kind of standard introduction that he skipped over in our case. I suspect not, but that is just my suspicion. What I believe should happen is that, once again, along with your booking confirmation email, you should have the name of one of the staff members who will be in the room and responsible for table safety in writing. On the day, that staff member should be wearing a very clear and obvious identifier, like a different coloured t-shirt or a special lanyard or a badge. They should tell every player who arrives in the room their name and their role, and that that player is very welcome to approach them or flag them down if they have any issues with their game at any point. That person should also be walking around the room between games to check that things like X cards and content warnings are clearly visible on the tables and being implemented where appropriate, in the same way the staff member in our room walked around to make sure the GMs were keeping to time. Of course, conventions should also staff their game rooms adequately enough that safety representatives can take breaks and take turns, because they'll have to stay inside the game room at all times when on duty. If the convention doesn't have the staffing capacity to do that, the answer isn't to not do it, the answer is to reduce the number of game tables running. An invitation to give feedback. I think everyone who plays in a convention game should receive an email immediately after the convention ends, if not immediately after their time slot ends, with a link to a simple feedback form. This form should collect which game they played in, so if there are any complaints about safety or GM conduct, that can be connected back to the GM in question and investigated. Distribution of feedback forms like this can be automated. If I can do it, and I have, there's absolutely no reason someone who managed to organise a whole in-person convention can't. So, there we have it. One very opinionated TTRPG professional's views on how convention games can be made better, safer, and more comfortable experiences for everyone, with minimal cost and minimal changes to existing workflows. For further reading, I highly recommend Cozy RPG Review's excellent video overview of the history of safety tools in TTRPGs, which highlights the ways in which these tools have existed for quite a bit longer than you might think, and has a good explanation of why these tools are particularly important in convention settings. If you are a convention organizer and you want to use any of these ideas, go for it! I did not invent any of this stuff. It is all inspired by things I've learned from others. I'm sharing it for free because I want people to do it, and I doubt you can afford my consultation rates anyway. Feel free to shoot me an email if you've got some money burning in your pocket, though. I am very good. If you have thoughts to add on this topic, I invite you to add them in the comments. Are there different safety tools that you think would work better for conventions than the ones that I've discussed? Are there logistical issues with my suggestions that I hadn't considered? I'm not going to debate you, I've said my piece, but I do promise I will read your comments and I will think about what you have to say. Thanks so much for watching.